Good evening, live from ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Beautiful Harare. Welcome to The Chase. Tonight's discussion, corruption, fiscal transparency. Is Zimbabwe doing enough? This live broadcast is brought to you by Zimpapers TV Network, ZTN, and our broadcast partners, Capi Talk, Nyami Nyami FM, and Diamond FM, and of course, Voice of America, going out to 80 channels across the world. So all of you out there, hello from The Chase. We'd also like to thank our partners, the United States Embassy in Harare. Now, hello, I'm Andy Hodges.
Had you forgotten your name?
I've forgotten my name, but I remembered it at the last minute. Thank you.
Well done. And my name is Candice Mwakalyelye. And now, of course, if you are watching us tonight, we would love to hear from you. So make sure that you join the conversation using our various platforms. If you want to join us on Twitter, it is at ZTN News. On Facebook, Zimpapers TV Network. Make sure that we hear your voice. And wherever it is you're joining us from, welcome to The Chase.
It is, and of course, before we start and get into the main meat of our program, we are privileged to welcome to ZTN Studios the United States Ambassador to Zimbabwe, Ambassador Brian Nichols. The U.S. Embassy, of course, in Zimbabwe is a partner for tonight's episode of The Chase. We now invite Ambassador Nichols to say a few words.
Good evening, Honorable Chair of the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, Justice Loice Matanda-Moyo, Honorable Minister of Justice Ziyambi Ziyambi, founding editor of Karigo, Mr. Edmund Kudzayi, Director Trustee of Undugu Institute, Dr. Mungai Lenneiye, Executive Director of Transparency International, Ms. Muchaneta Mundopa, esteemed moderators, guests, good evening. The United States is deeply proud to sponsor this event, which goes to the heart of our commitment to expanding inclusive and sustainable economic opportunities for the Zimbabwean people. Many American firms have remarked that Zimbabwe's talented workforce, abundant natural resources, and talented people present bountiful opportunities for investment. However, businesses and investors are coming with their notebooks open, but their checkbooks are closed because of concerns about the reform efforts and transparency. Economic uncertainty, corruption, concerns about the rule of law have clouded Zimbabwe's reputation. Transparency International estimates corruption costs the Zimbabwean economy $1 billion per year, raising the cost of doing business and undermining business confidence. His Excellency President Mnangagwa has characterized corruption as a constant constraint on economic growth. In Zimbabwe, Justice Loice Matanda-Moyo has taken bold action in her first days at leading the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission and called corruption the main cause of Zimbabwe's economic challenges. You have seen reports of the $6 million in clandestinely awarded contracts and several improper payments to board members and senior company officials of ZINARA, the Zimbabwe National Roads Administration. Auditor General Mildred Cheery's discovery that ZESA and the Zimbabwe Electricity Transmission and Distribution Company has not taken ownership of $4.9 million worth of transformers, despite making payments for them many years ago. There are many, many other examples that I could cite, but transparency and taking concrete steps to combat corruption are what's needed to address these challenges. Hopefully, important steps forward, such as the Zimbabwe Reserve Bank releasing audited statements, which has not happened for many months, would help provide greater transparency in the monetary sector. Clearer awards in the mining sector would help investors understand what the opportunities are. When we come to the issues of rule of law, we cannot forget the issues of the rights enshrined in Zimbabwe's constitution. The crackdowns against protesters in August of last year and in January of this year for people asserting their constitutional rights presented deep concern for the international community as well as the private sector. Hopefully, the government will take steps to hold those responsible for violence accountable. Similarly, the arrests of civil society members, union leaders, and others call into question whether or not fundamental rights are respected. Zimbabwe's Constitution of 2013 is a beautiful document, and I applaud the efforts to bring Zimbabwe's laws into full compliance with the Constitution, and look forward to hearing from the Honorable Minister of Justice how those efforts are progressing. We want to deepen our relationship with Zimbabwe. We want to move forward in tandem, but political reforms and building confidence will be key to that effort. We have seen important progress in other countries in the continent. For example, in Ethiopia, the ongoing implementation of Prime Minister Abiy's reform agenda has strengthened the rule of law and fortified business confidence. Zimbabwe has the potential to do just as well, if not better. My advice to government leaders, as well as the private sector here, is be bold. The reforms that Zimbabwe needs are within your grasp. I encourage you all to take the steps necessary to combat corruption, and the important actions that Zach has taken today are a positive step in that regard. Democracies hold governments to account, but they can only do so when the government is using its resources wisely and the people know how that money has been spent. I look forward to hearing a robust debate this evening, and we look forward to supporting Zimbabwe's efforts to reform, to increase investment, and to promote the rule of law. Thank you very much.
That was United States of America Ambassador to Zimbabwe, Ambassador Brian Nichols, with some opening comments before we leap into our program. Now then, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Edie Mnangagwa, is on record calling for a fierce fight against corruption at all levels for economic turnaround to be achieved.
Now, it's not only in state institutions that we have rotten apples, but of course there has been the practice of underhanded deals that has been prevalent in the private sector as well. And we have seen the local authorities often in the headlines for all the wrong reasons.
Now, fighting corruption, President Mnangagwa has repeatedly said, is a collective responsibility, and therefore Zimbabweans across the board need to support and complement the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, ZAC, so that it fulfills its mandate.
Let's take a look at some background on this issue.
Zimbabwe has 4 main organizations tasked to deal with corruption. These are the National Prosecuting Authority, the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, the Special Anti-Corruption Unit in the Office of the President, and the Zimbabwe Republic Police. Despite having all these arms of the state tasked with combating corruption, the country ranks 160 out of 175 on the Corruption Perception Index. Some believe the government is not ready to walk its corruption talk. On the other hand, the Zimbabwean government insists there is no going back on dealing with corruption, with President Emmerson Mnangagwa recently tasking provinces to nominate Central Committee members into a commission of inquiry to investigate ZANU-PF bigwigs allegedly involved in corrupt activities. This comes a few weeks after the ruling party's Youth League produced a list of party bigwigs who are allegedly involved in corrupt activities. Last month, the Auditor General released a report highlighting deep and systemic cases of corruption in parastatals which have gone unchecked for decades. For example, the former CEO of ZESA Group, Josh Chifamba, is said to have spent over $600 million from 2011 to 2017 on luxury cars, yet the country is failing to pay a $27 million debt to Eskom in South Africa. The Auditor General's report also exposed more rot in the energy company's subsidiaries, the Zimbabwe Electricity Transmission Distribution Company and the Zimbabwe Power Company since 2016, where advance payments to Pito Investments and York International were made, amounting to a total of $5 million, but the goods have remained undelivered for 9 years. Over the last 24 months, there have been high-profile arrests, but the cases have been dragging on before the courts. And just this morning, Zimbabwe woke up to the news that the Environment, Tourism and Hospitality Industry Minister, Priska Mupfumira, had been arrested on charges relating to looting at the National Social Security Authority, NASA. Before moving to her current portfolio, Mupfumira was the Minister of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare, under whose purview NASA falls. Just how far is the Zimbabwean government ready to go in its fight against corruption? This is The Chase.
Just how far is the Zimbabwean government to go in its fight against corruption? Good sentiments there. Now then, to our esteemed panelists, you'll be asked to respond to a question and given 1 minute or thereabouts to make your submissions. Now, although interjections may be there from time to time, we ask that you be civil yet vibrant and make your contributions to Candice and myself. Our values here at ZTN are dignity, dialogue and debate.
Right, now to kick off our conversation tonight, maybe we begin by asking our panelists to introduce themselves. And of course, let's start with the gentleman on my left.
My name is Edmund Kudzayi. I'm a journalist. I'm currently editing Kukurigo, which is a WhatsApp newspaper, which sends out the news every day to some 37,000 Zimbabweans. We think social media is a very important platform, and we're hoping to do a little bit, and hopefully we can contribute to this conversation. Very excited to have the Justice Minister and Justice Matanda-Moyo here with us today as well.
Thank you.
My name is Mungai N. I work for Do Institute. I'm a development worker. I spend most of my time listening to young people. I'm interested in issues of economic governance. And my conversation with young people is trying to understand what do they see their future and what kind of opportunities are they looking for. So this is an important discussion because I think young people want to know how will they function in an economy when the rules don't necessarily work in what they consider they work for them. So that's what I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, viewers. My name is Ziyambi Ziyambi, the Justice Minister.
Good evening, viewers. My name is Muchaneta Mundopa, the Executive Director for Transparency International Zimbabwe, which is the Zimbabwean chapter of the Global Movement Against Corruption.
Good evening, viewers. My name is Justice Loice Matanda-Moyo, the Chairperson of the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome to The Chase, of course, and here at ZTN Studios. We are privileged to have you here all. Now, Minister, let's leap straight into the debate. Minister, it appears for the first time in many years there is political will at the highest level to tackle corruption. Only today, Zimbabwe received news that the current Environment, Tourism and Hospitality Industry Minister, Priska Mupfumira, has this morning been arrested over the National Social Security scandal. May I ask, what is motivating this new thrust to tackle corruption head-on?
Thank you very much. I think what is motivating the new thrust is that when the new dispensation came into power, we identified the social ills that were bedeviling us. And one of the things that we identified was corruption. And we said we need to tackle corruption and deal with it because it retards development. The other thing that we identified was we needed to open up for business and re-engage and ensure that we deal with the evils of corruption or of sanctions, because there's no way we can have any meaningful engagement if we still have corruption and sanctions with us. So if you listen to the president when he came in, he identified that there is going to be zero tolerance to corruption, and we're going to deal with it. And he indicated that we should not show any favor. It doesn't matter who that particular individual is. We should deal with it so that we rid ourselves of the evils of corruption.
Thank you. Maybe I could just open this up. Do you think that now, Muchaneta, do you think that now the government of Zimbabwe has the political will, or the political will is there to at least take corruption head on? I know we're going to get deeper into it during the program, but let's talk about political will. It appears that the words coming out of the president's mouth are saying exactly that.
Thank you, Andy. I would say, like what the minister rightfully said, since the coming in of the new dispensation in 2017, there have been numerous institutional and legal frameworks that have been introduced to fight corruption, but still, we find that Transparency International released the Global Corruption Barometer a few weeks back, and we discovered that 71% of Zimbabweans do not think the government is doing enough to fight corruption. What is the cause? What is the reason?
Perceptions. We're going to get to your report, actually. It's part of our script here. So don't worry. We're going to actually ask you some questions about that report and get you to really unpack it for it later. So apologies for jumping in.
Edmund was jotting something down. I think you wanted to contribute something to that?
Yes. I think I agree with the Justice Minister that the government has said all the right things, and there appears to be some action. But it's apparent to those who are analyzing the circumstances in which we live that action is limited to those who are powerless, or at least those who have fallen out of favor with the powers that be. I'll illustrate. Recently, there was a document signed by the Minister of Health authorizing the release of drugs to, I think it's for the Lupane by-election for ZANU-PF. In any other society, that's criminal. There was an outcry on social media, but the government said absolutely nothing. And the reason why the government said absolutely nothing is because what the Minister of Health did was in furtherance of ZANU-PF's interests, in furtherance of the system. So we find ourselves in the place where corruption is being tackled, and it's interesting that we have an anti-corruption commission. If the justice system, if the judiciary, if the police, law enforcement were able to do their work without political interference, we would not need a commission. If the police had the power to drive to any minister's home and arrest them without getting fired, there would be no need for the president to say anything. The police would just do their job. So it strikes me as though what we have in Zimbabwe is a fundamental problem of the rule of law. And that problem is being created because we now have a system where there are individuals who are so powerful. These are special interests. So I agree, the president has, and this has been acknowledged globally, that he says all the right things. But the difficulty seems to be the fact that we don't see the action. And whenever you find someone being arrested in Zimbabwe, or you find youths at ZANU-PF headquarters holding a press conference and then naming a cabinet minister as being corrupt, they're not risk takers, they're not foolish. It's because there's a real organ grinder behind them who's told them to proceed.
Thank you, Edmund. As you know, we have a minute. Let Minister Ziyambi respond.
I need to respond to that and respectfully say that he is focused on ZANU-PF and not the real issues about corruption. Let me explain. In any country, you start off with a political party. Political party produces a manifesto to say that we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 for our people. ZANU-PF is the ruling party. If I go out to Murewa, for instance, and I visit a clinic and I find out that they don't have any medicines, it's not corruption to write to a minister of health to say that I've been to Murewa Hospital, they don't have medicines. I think what we need is to define what is corruption, rather than to become emotional and say that a senior member of a party that sets the policy. Because when you talk about the government of Zimbabwe, the policy of the government of Zimbabwe is derived from ZANU-PF. So when a senior member of the party walks into an institution and finds anomalies and writes to the Minister of Health, and the minister responds, I do not believe in the dictionary that I know that is corruption. And his definition of corruption is for the police walking into houses of ministers and addressing them. I do not believe that the deep-rooted corruption in this country was being done by ministers. You alluded to ZESA. ZESA is not run directly by a minister. And I remember I had a discussion with the president, and we were shocked with what we discovered pertaining to the corruption at ZESA. And you also spoke about Zinara. Zinara was not run directly by ministers. We have the judiciary, I have to say, she was part of that. They are a shining example of people who exercise their authority according to the Constitution. So it's wrong to play to the gallery, so to say, for lack of a better word, and then pick an incident where we are the ruling party for the next 5 years. Whether we win Lupane or not, it does not matter. But is there a need of medicines in Lupane? And if a member of the party whose policy is that we should ensure that our people get medicines raises it, it does not amount to a corrupt activity that should lead to the demonization of that particular minister. And our youths addressed a press conference once. He alludes to ZANU-PF youths addressing press conferences about corruption. They did it once. It's not something that is prevalent everywhere. So I believe that let's focus and find solution as opposed to name calling and blaming. Let's find solution. What are the real causes of corruption? Arrest of a minister is not going to solve the deep-rooted corruption within the private sector and some of the state institutions.
Thank you, Minister. We will come back to you. We just would like to just make an announcement, if you like. Justice Matanda-Moyo has actually come to the show. She is little bit under the weather, but she actually made sure she came to the show because she understands how important this discussion is on corruption. So, Justice, thank you very much for coming. She, however, will have to leave probably at the break of our first segment. But, however, her deputy will be ably taking over from her to continue talking on behalf of ZAC. Now, Justice Matanda-Moyo, I have to ask this question because it's been asked of you many times, of course. Concerns have been raised that you are the wife, of course, of the current Foreign Minister, S.B. Moyo, and that possibly this could compromise your job. I think let's get it out there. What would you say to that such a comment?
Thank you for that question. It has been in the open that I'm the wife of S.B. Moyo. We've been married since 1991, and we are still so married. I've been a judge of the High Court and Labour Court since 2006, and I have been conducting my job very well. When S.B. Moyo was appointed the minister, I was already a judge. And as a judge, I can take up any opportunities which I feel I'm qualified to take and which I feel I can tackle. As I'm seated here, I want to assure the viewers that I'm not conflicted in any way. If S.B. Moyo is going to be investigated, there are several commissioners in the commission. I'm not the only commissioner, and I'm not the only one who is going to say investigate this one. That is a commission decision. But the commission, again, do not interfere with investigations from the onset. When you report your matter, it is up to the person receiving that report to formulate an opinion that an offense or corruption has been committed, and investigations will start. If you check my history, I do not have a history of favoritism. I simply get matters and deal with those matters as they come. I'm not conflicted in any way, and wherever I'm conflicted, I will recuse myself and let another commissioner take over. I know the rules of the game.
Thank you. We actually, there was an interesting comment that we had. It was when you were a judge and he was appointed for foreign minister. Were you asked if you were conflicted? If he was
I was never asked. That's the issue. He has never been taken to task on why he's a minister when he's married to a judge. I've never heard anybody ask him a question of saying that your wife is going to influence you. So I'm actually concerned about that people are not fair to the women folk. At least I was a judge first. That question should be taken against S.B. Moyo, not against myself. Definitely. Because I was in my position first.
All right. Now, Muchaneta, you have something to respond to that.
Yes, I think, Justice, you have to understand that the public perception on the effectiveness of the anti-corruption institutions is very low. And the fact that you are so close to power poses a threat, or rather, we tend not to trust those institutions because of the history behind. So I think it's also an opportunity for you now to prove yourself, to say, in as much as I'm close to the center of power, I can execute my duties diligently without any favor. So it's an opportunity for you to prove yourself.
So I think the question now becomes, Justice, can Zak be trusted?
Mm-hmm. Yes, Zak can be trusted. I appeal to anybody to bring up their matter to Zak and then to complain later if I don't take it up.
Fair
We'll
enough.
take you up on your word.
Fair enough.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Now, it is reported, of course, that corruption costs about $1 billion a year, US dollars. Now, the Auditor General's report highlights areas of weakness, but it appears that the government has not actually previously taken any action to address these concerns. Why do you think is the case, Minister? And, you know, what is the government doing to maybe reverse this perception and address any issues that have been raised in the most recent report?
Thank you very much. What I can say is I cannot speak for the previous administration, why they didn't take action. But definitely, when the new administration came into power, there are several changes that have happened, even in parastatals. You saw the changes that have happened to ZESA. You saw the changes that happened to Zinara. And we are only barely a year old, and the reports have been tabled now, and government is looking at those reports with a view of taking up the recommendations where there is need for prosecution or further investigation. We have the newly constituted Anti-Corruption Commission. We've already started taking action. If you remember, when I came in, I spoke to the commissioners that were there that the perception out there is that the Anti-Corruption Commission that we had was not doing enough, and we politely requested them that can we find a solution, and they tendered their resignation, and we came up with a new Anti-Corruption Commission. And if you look at the composition, we were not even partisan. We looked at individuals that we believed can do the job, just like what Justice Matanda-Moyo said. The fact that she's a minister's wife is neither here nor there. She has proved herself in a respective field. She's a proven judge. She has done her work very well, and we believed that she could lead the commission. We have commissioners, some of them from the opposition, but we believe that they excelled in the interviews, and the president said, let's have them. So the political will to deal with what was happening in the past is there. And very soon you will start seeing action being taken.
Minister, sorry to interrupt you there, but the point is this. The Auditor General's report has been released. It was released a couple of weeks ago. And what we're asking here is concrete steps, because that report, I believe, is generally accepted, is what can be called a horror story in certain areas. What action specifically is the Justice Minister, and I suppose this also comes to you, Justice Matanda-Moyo, what are you actually doing about this? Or are we going to see other reports where people are getting away with scot-free pillaging, if I can call it that?
What we have to appreciate also is some of the individuals that are implicated are no longer in those institutions. So the process that has to happen is you do not just say just because an audit report has come, you immediately, on the basis of that report, go out to arrest somebody. We have relevant organs that do investigations, that look at what that particular report is saying and try to find where the law was contravened so that they can craft the appropriate charge.
But Minister, it was reported, it was reported that you had referred the auditor's report to Zak, if I'm not mistaken. Is that true?
Yes, I can confirm that we are in possession of the Auditor General's reports, and we have started investigating some of the issues reported in those audit reports. We are isolating matters where we feel that there was abuse of office, there was corruption, theft or misappropriation of funds. We are opening dockets, investigating, and after investigations, we are causing the arrest of people. Where we feel that it's civil in nature, we actually recommend civil suits against whichever company is there.
Okay, thank you. I think you talked about proving herself. I think that's probably a good start to there in terms of looking at the Auditor General's report. Do you have any comments, gentlemen, in terms of the Auditor General's report and what you think should happen in terms of implementation of getting to the bottom of it and getting people?
I think let's start with maybe Dr. Munga.
Well, generally, the auditors' reports around the world documents that they have several audiences. One of them is the ordinary citizens who says, have the funds which the government has collected and deployed for service been used for the purpose of which they were meant to be. There's a second audience, which is normally the parliament, which is supposed to at least, there's normally a parliamentary committee of oversight, which then at least listens to understand whether, are you being accused for breaking the law? Are you being accused you did things because the rules were so weak that in fact, by the law, not the regulation not making it possible to act, you actually committed a law by default rather than by you committed by omission of the commission. Then, of course, then there's the anti-corruption agencies that deal with it, and there's the police that does investigation. There's the media who is supposed to actually doing the digestion and telling us the difference between what we read, what the data says, and what the reality is between the perception and the reality. And unfortunately, most corruption reports, people remember the last end. They don't remember the system that need to come into place to actually prove that, in fact, there is a corrupt act. And there are instances where one is listening here and wondering, is somebody who actually worked as a CEO in a corporation, in a parastatal, there was a board, the board authorized it, then the person accused of being corrupt. So where is the board? So the question is, and this is the danger one has with a lot of the auditors' report, is that you actually need a process of processing the data, because it's a matter of understanding the information and digesting. And I think here the press could help a lot by making sure that at least they do the digestion of the data to make sure people actually understand the relation between being corrupt or being just you didn't understand the rules, in which case that's no excuse, you are still ignorance, no excuse, or that the rules are weak. So it's quite often that compass is actually very difficult, not just in Zimbabwe, across the world.
Okay. Now, Edmund, you've been jotting down quite a lot. Let's hear from you.
Well, I think it's problematic, first of all, that we're having a conversation really at the highest level, that we're looking to the Justice Minister and we're looking to the head of the Anti-Corruption Commission. In reality, I think when Zimbabwe is operating efficiently, we should not have to rely on the Justice Minister. He should be worried about prison reform and other weightier issues, similarly with the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission. I think the real problem why we don't have law enforcement effective, because clearly the question means that the police themselves, you can't go to a police station and say, why haven't you taken action? Because all of us are aware that there's a political problem. And it's the elephant in the room. And if we want a solution, we need to confront the political issue. Now, I'll give you an illustration of where there's a political issue. You had a case recently, and I'm illustrating the political issue here, of some young activists who went for an international conference. They were arrested at Harare International Airport. They were taken by the police. There was still a barrier. The prosecutors could have said, no, we're not going to prosecute this. They're competent. But they decided to prosecute it. Why? Because of politics. The magistrate could have said, I'm not going to remand these people, there's no case. But the magistrate chose to remand them. And now, because that's a Schedule 3 offense, immediately you can't apply for bail. You have to apply to the High Court. Those unfortunate young people spent 3 weeks in remand prison, only for Justice Chitapi to then give them bail and say there doesn't appear to be an offense here. The question is, how is it possible that the police arrested them? Perhaps they're not well trained. Okay, it's fine. How is it that the National Prosecuting Authority allowed this very well publicized case to be prosecuted when we all know there's no case? How is it that a magistrate remanded these people and then they spent 3 weeks in prison? What that shows you is that all these people had political considerations. I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to be the one who messes this up. This looks political. I'm just going to throw it forward. And this is the reason why you end up then talking to the Justice Minister to say, Justice Minister, what are you going to do about this report? The police themselves should have the liberty to take action. I don't believe the police actually have that liberty.
Edmund, if you don't mind, I mean, as the Justice Minister said earlier, sure, it happened as a case, and you've said it right. And by the way, I will say to you that the views expressed today are those of our panelists and not necessarily those of ZTN or Zim Papers TV network. But the point is this, is that let's look at the bigger thing, because we can always pick little things happening all over the place, little parts of corruption. I mean, the other day we had reports of someone having to pay $20 to get a full tank of petrol, or having to pay $200 to get a passport. Or, I mean, the corruption, I think we'll get to the Transparency National Report where 45% said they had paid a bribe in the last 12 months. Let's look at the bigger issues. And I think, if you don't mind, I'll come to Justice Matanda-Moyo. Now, you're on record as saying that ZAC has already got over 200 cases of corruption-related crimes emanating from a varied spectrum of the economy. And you said arrests will be affected soon. Now, of course, you can't tell us the nitty-gritty details, but maybe a little bit of an update, because the program has got transparency in it. So what's any progress reports you can give us?
Let me say that you'll actually be shocked to say that most of the corruption is also happening in our sporting sector. We've got a lot of those matters.
Sporting sector?
Sporting sector, sports, rugby, cricket, soccer, netball, and so forth. The private sector as well is also coming up as another corrupt entity. And it's actually the private sector which entices public servants to receive those bribes. So Transparency International here should actually work on the private sector and try and make them aware of the dangers of paying bribes to public officials and enticing them with money. And the NGOs themselves, you'll be very surprised to learn that the NGOs themselves, they're very corrupt. They are trying to earn a lot of money, and in trying to earn that money, they are getting that money through corruption. So corruption is from all sectors of the economy. It's not only the public sector.
So any progress? You said 200 cases, arrests coming soon. Maybe you could fill in the
once we are ready, we will arrest. We will not be at least rushed into arrest. We need to make up our minds, because we don't want to arrest those people who are not, where there's no reasonable suspicion that they've committed offences.
Before we move into the rest of the panelists, I'd just like to ask you, as well, it's proven that ZAC is understaffed, and not just necessarily with people, but also in terms of the skills, because obviously hunting down corruption is a skill.
It's a skill.
You can't just take a policeman and say, go and hunt corruption.
It's true, it's true.
What are you doing about making ZAC capacitated to be able to hunt down corrupt people and bring them to trial and to court and get convictions?
We've started training our officers. So training is actually a very big issue. We've recruited. So we've got more staff at the moment, and I'm glad to say that we are getting support from the government itself. And we are also getting support from international and regional and local organizations in that respect. So I'm glad that it's coming up.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, now, Muchaneta, she did talk about how the private sector has a hand to play in, a bit of all this accepting bribes, and she did say maybe you should look into it. Do you have any comment in relation to that, for example?
Okay, maybe I'll just touch on everything she said, really. Mm-hmm. I think we need to address the root cause of why people are now engaging in petty corruption. In Zimbabwe, we have developed a culture of impunity, where you conduct corruption, you are involved in corrupt activities, nothing is done to you. Catch, arrest and release sort of thing. So people now find it easier to engage in petty corruption for several reasons. The private sector, for example, the cost of doing business in Zimbabwe is very high, and it's something that should be looked at. Someone would rather pay bribes than be tax compliant, for example. So the root issue is the culture of impunity that has prevailed in Zimbabwe, that has made corruption so endemic and systematic, such that it is now ordinary. As Transparency International Zimbabwe, we conducted a study in 2017, where we find that Zimbabwe, we have come to a point where we have normalized corruption with the terms like we have normalized the system, because honestly, I think corruption, yes, we have normalized the situation such that it is no longer seen as a criminal offense. You see, so also with our court system arresting people engaged in petty corruption and leaving those who are involved in grand corruption. So it poses a major threat and is something that we need to look at as a country as a whole, not focus on petty corruption, really.
Mm. Any comments from...
Yeah, I think, let's step back a bit. The question of culture. In a village, if there are two examples. If a chief is going to arbitrate a case and you go and see him before and you give him a goat, you are bribing him. If you go after you see him after he's arbitrated the case, in a cultural sense, you're saying thank you. And the question is, when that gets translated into institutions, then the corruption will start being built from the bottom up. So the question is, what happens to a person, a woman or a man, who has been very honest in a village? People like the way they do things. They don't steal. They look after the affairs of the citizens, and they are not corrupt. The day they become councillors or they become officials, all of a sudden they are corrupt. The question is, what is happening in this transition? And to me, I think part of the discussion, and this is not just Zimbabwe, is as Africans, is whether you're talking about human beings across the globe, is what is a culture in a particular society that sees that transition from being an honest citizen to being a corrupt person? And this, to me, is where I'm interested in the question of culture here. Because, for instance, I used to make a joke with the TIZ. If I say you are corrupt, I say, yeah, okay. If I say you are a sellout, in Zimbabwe, that is a serious accusation. So all of a sudden in Zimbabwe, the culture is that being corrupt, well, I can get away with it, but if you call me a sellout, then I'm willing to actually take you to very far. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how do we start dealing with the corruption in a way that if I leave $1 million here and walk out, I'll bet you most of you, very few of you would walk past and not pick up something. Is it because you are corrupt? Well, there are no rules. The system, there are no consequences. So if there are no rules, there are no consequences, then everyone becomes corrupt. And my final example is that if you say that trading in the foreign exchange market is a crime arrestable, and the exchange rate is $1 to $1, and the market is 1 to 10, and half the population is actually participating in the foreign exchange market, are half of Zimbabweans corrupt? Are you going to arrest half of Zimbabweans, lock them up, because they are participating in something the systems, the laws are defined as corrupt? So part of this discussion is we really have to kind of set the context, not just the end product, but the processes, the systems, the definitions, and how this takes place, and how we're actually setting the places to make sure that at least the corruption isn't applied to what society has normalized, or the rules are made it everyone a criminal. And therefore, to me, that's the discussion as a development worker I'm particularly very interested to understand, because that's how we're going to move the institution so that the institutions start actually dealing with the real corruption, not somebody who went and cheated a dollar because they needed to buy medicine for their children, and there's no way they're going to get it.
Thank you, Minister. I think there's a lot there that's been unpacked, but I'd like you to at least also address Edmund's point about the politicalness, in the sense that people believe they have to take action because of political considerations, and also, of course, the issues that were raised by the other panelists, if you may.
Thank you very much. Again, when I look at, I listened attentively to Edmund. He focused on the arrest of activists, and the example that he gave, I'm trying to reconcile the example to corruption. The topic under discussion is, are we doing enough in terms of corruption? And he focused on what he termed lack of rule of law and political will. I believe that if we are really going to tackle issues to deal with corruption, the issue of the arrest of those people is not at the core of the cause of corruption in Zimbabwe.
What is the cause, Minister? You've said this twice, I think. What do you think?
I've indicated in the beginning that what has happened to us over the last decade we have had institutional breakdown. Our institutions became weak, largely because of the misgovernance that was happening then. But most importantly, when we had sanctions, we became a closed society. And where you have a society that is impoverished, it breeds corruption. I'll give you a good example. There was a time, 2008, 7, 8, when we had shortage of fuel. You would find small boys holding 5-liter gallons of petrol selling. The moment the system normalized, it went away. So if we don't look at the root cause of why our industry broke down, because our industry over the years also went down, we now need to retool. Talking of resuscitating industry is out of the question. We now need to retool and probably start all over again. And we informalized our economy. And like you said, that we then go after people who are changing $1 to buy medicines. But the real cause of our problems is we had breakdown of institutions that were supposed to ensure that the economy and the governance is okay. And that is the root cause. When we came in, we then decided that we now need to turn around that system. And we said, okay, we'll open up for business. We decided to do away with the 51-49%. We are in the process of coming up with new reforms in terms of ease of doing business. Even the political reforms that you alluded to, we are carrying those out. We are going to table in Parliament a lot of legislative changes, so to speak, to enhance the freedoms of our people.
Right.
So a lot is now starting to happen. But over and above, while we are still trying to do that, we are riddled by the fact that we still have economic embargoes that do not make our destination favorable.
All right, Minister, we would like you, though, before we go for a break, to quickly address an issue that was raised by both Muchaneta and Dr. Munda, the issue of, let's call it arrest and release. Somebody's arrested.
Catch and release.
Catch and release was what was used, yes? They've been caught, they've been arrested, and tomorrow they're out on the streets. But the issue itself seems to have been a big issue. What is happening there?
Thank you very much. I think Justice Matanda-Moyo responded to that adequately. When you tried to pressure that you have this auditor's report, why are we not seeing any arrests? The problem that we had is we had this excitement and people rushed to arrest people without carrying out adequate arrests. We now have a new commission. She understands that very well, that we need to have thorough investigations. And my belief is that some people we don't even need to arrest, we indict and we take them to court. And they will sweat when they realize that the evidence before them is so huge that their way to jail is almost a certainty. But what has been happening is a lot of noise would be made, so and so has done this, and that person is arrested. But as the docket is being prepared, you suddenly realize that it's not that what we thought, and hence you had the catch and release. And all these reforms, even coming up with a new anti-corruption commission, we also are having reforms within the police force, are meant to ensure that we have this culture of investigating thoroughly and be sure that what we are taking to court is we will get a conviction.
Thank you. We're going to have to take a breather, unfortunately, but as we said at the beginning of the show, Justice Matanda-Moyo will have to leave us at this point, but she will be replaced by her deputy. So what we thought was we'd give Justice Matanda-Moyo an opportunity just to say some final words before you have to go, and of course thanking you for coming on the show. So please, if you could just have some words before you leave.
Yes, corruption should be fought by all of us. It is the duty of all Zimbabweans to come together and really fight this scourge. But the problem that we have in Zimbabwe is that some people have decided to be critics, just criticizing everything, instead of coming aboard and helping in the fight. I'm actually appealing to everyone to come on board and let's fight this corruption together, as it affects all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Of course, we'd like to thank our broadcast partners, Capi Talk, Nyami Nyami FM, Diamond FM, and of course, Voice of America, going out to 80 channels across the world and millions of viewers. Thank you very much.
Of course, remember that you can chime in on the conversation via Twitter. The handle is @ZTN News. On Facebook, that is Zimpapers TV Network. We will be reading out your responses later on in the show, so do stay tuned.
And we'd also like to thank, of course, our partners who are sponsoring this show, United States Embassy in Zimbabwe. Anyway, we'll be back after the breather. Don't go away. The chase is not going anywhere either. Welcome back to The Chase, live from ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Our discussion tonight, corruption transparency, fiscal transparency. Is Zimbabwe doing enough? It's a good point. Now then, we'd like to thank our broadcast partners, Capi Talk, Nyami Nyami FM, Diamond FM, and Voice of America, going out to 80 channels around the world. And of course, we'd like to thank our partners, United States Embassy here in Harare, who are proud sponsors of The Chase tonight.
And of course, we do have the conversation going on social media, so keep your comments coming in. On Twitter, that is at ZTN News, and on Facebook, Zim Papers TV Network. Now, getting back into our discussion, of course, we did mention that Justice Matanda-Moyo was leaving, and she has been replaced by her deputy. We will give him a chance to introduce himself.
Good evening, viewers and all those who are listening. My name is Kuziva Murapa. I'm deputy to Justice Matanda-Moyo at ZAC.
Welcome to The Chase, Kuziva. Yeah, I'm sure you'll step into the big shoes of the Justice Matanda-Moyo.
Now, taking us back straight into the conversation, Minister, let me come to you now. Your ministry, you understand, is working on laws that will make it easier for the state to confiscate proceeds of ill-gotten gains. Could you please explain this process further and maybe some of these laws that you're planning to introduce?
Thank you very much. What we have noticed, which we have noticed across Africa, I attended the first African Forum on Corruption in Egypt, is prosecuting one case of corruption will probably cost you around $2 million. And it's very expensive and it's very complicated. And one of the best ways of dealing with it is coming up with legislation to deal with unexplained wealth, where you make an expert application to a judge, the enforcement agent, to get an order where they will come to you and say, we understand you have this mansion, you have this, can you prove to us the source of your funds? How did you get this? If you fail to produce proof for what you have, then that is forfeited to the state. And we believe that the moment our citizens are conscious that if I acquire wealth and I'm unable to explain where I got it, it will also help in reducing corruption. The best way going forward, we believe, is to educate our people against the ills of corruption and putting in measures to ensure that we reduce corruption. We may fight corruption going backwards, looking at those that have embezzled funds, that have done whatever they did. But the immediate task that we have is to ensure that we ring-fence what we have and ensure that going forward we have an informed citizen that knows that corruption is an evil. So we're coming up with this legislation that will ensure that if you cannot explain your wealth, then it's forfeited to the state.
Minister, if I may, a lot of Zimbabweans who are accused of being corrupt have their money offshore. Their money sits in various centres around the world, London, Johannesburg, and so forth. Is your ministry or the government at least trying to work with other law enforcement agencies or even banks? Because I know in South Africa you have to report foreigners who have bank accounts and what they have in it, because you can look at local assets and find nothing, but maybe the person has millions of dollars sitting in London. Is there anything on the books that you're looking at to try and at least get that money back?
Yes, we're going to look into that. The Reserve Bank is trying to put mechanisms to ensure that we also go in that direction, because the majority of our people, they all do exactly what you are explaining, that they keep their money offshore. So we are looking at mechanisms to ensure that that is also taken into account.
Muchaneta, will it work?
When I read the amendment, I found it was a very progressive law. However, it would work if we also included the aspect of asset declaration. To know Minister X came into office owning what, they're leaving office with what, how do they acquire the things in between. Also, a Whistleblower Protection Act. Because at the moment, it seems like reporting corruption in Zimbabwe is a dangerous business. So people do not feel comfortable reporting corruption. Further, when I read the law, I discovered that it has retrospective effect, meaning it does not matter when it's going to be passed. it will apply to issues that were done before. So I'm happy. One of the reasons the minister said we have major corruption in Zimbabwe, you said it's the institutional failures. And institutions are there with the people who occupy those offices. So I'm hoping that the law will be applied to the people who perpetuated the institutional breakdown.
Dr. Munda? Do you think that these laws that they are proposing to bring in would make a difference?
Well, you have the 2013 Constitution, which is very clear on fiscal transparency issues. Zimbabwe has a very modern public financial management system, which by any account, it's actually one of the best around anywhere, certainly on the continent. So the question is, where is the problem in the transparency? And I think I would say two things. There is a tension in terms of, because the idea of fiscal transparency is that the government has to publish how they raise the money, what they do with it, and what services it produces. Now, there's a tension here because the government, and not just Zimbabwe government, all governments trying to protect themselves or protect their employees by having something called the Official Secrets Act. By itself, it means that as a government official, you're not required to go around issuing information. So the idea is that there's a system of publishing the information. The citizens are demanding the information to be made available, but they don't have enough mechanisms to get it done. They're relying on the media to make the information available. So this tension between the state, the citizens and non-state actors, and the media, how do you actually make sure that the information is made available? And if the information is not published by the government and the newspapers, the media has no way of actually going around investing it, or there's no incentive, they're not doing it. The citizens are left in a position they feel that we are not getting the transparency required. That's one type of tension.
Okay, now let me actually interrupt you there, because so fighting corruption and of course improving transparency are believed to be one side or two sides of the same coin. So let's start off with maybe, what do you understand transparency to mean, and does one necessarily precede the other?
Yes, in the sense that transparency means that we know what you are doing. What you are doing, whatever, if you're going to spend government money, you should know that the way you spend that money will be made available to the public, and the newspapers and the media and non-state actors will be able to know what's going on. If the systems and institutions don't allow it to happen, then you know you're not going to be caught. And therefore, you can't fight corruption if you don't have transparency, because transparency is an essential part of it. And in Africa, we have found a way of calling corruption things that really are beyond corruption. Corruption means that I'm supposed to buy a tractor for $10,000. I negotiate with a supplier for $12,000. So I made $2,000. That's corruption. But what happens when somebody negotiates for $12,000, takes the $12,000 and doesn't deliver the tractor at all?
What would you call that?
Theft. So instead of calling a spade what it is, what we have in Africa is a lot of it not corruption. It's actually theft. It's beyond corruption in the sense that you promise to buy antibiotics for people to be cured. You actually took up commission on it, but you didn't deliver the drugs. So in fact, you're actually killing children, you're killing patients, you're buying chemicals that are chalk. Therefore, you are making a whole population actually exposed to illness. So somewhere along the line, we in Africa have to actually start saying, calling a spade what it is a spade. This is theft. This is not corruption. It's beyond corruption. Because corruption kind of gives a sense that, well, you've taken a commission here and there. No, when you're actually buying and you're not delivering anything, then we ought to have different rules for actually defining what corruption is.
Edmund, I think, as Candice said, I can see you itching there. What would you like to add anything?
I have the feeling that you're hoping that I don't.
No, you're free to open and you're free to say what you like.
And just to hit back at the Justice Minister, when I gave the example about the police arresting those activists, I was giving that example to explain why we end up having this conversation, speaking at such a high level. I was saying the system is broken. That's why I gave that example, to illustrate that the system is broken. And that case is a very good example of that. On to your question, it's progressive. I think the difficulty is, and this might have to be looked at, is the threshold. Zimbabwe is an informal economy. For a long time, Zimbabwe was a cash economy. People went to Joburg, they were car dealers, they did so many things that are off the books. A lot of it is legitimate income. Now, if you were to ask a guy who owns a house in Zengeza worth perhaps $40,000, owns a vehicle that's worth maybe $10,000 to prove where they got the money, they'll probably fail. Does that make them a criminal? No. Does it mean there's a justifiable moral reason to seize their property? No. So I'm concerned about the thresholds, and that perhaps we haven't given cognizance to the fact that we're an informal economy and that for a very long time we're a cash economy. It's a very different situation now when there's not any cash going about. The issue again comes back to a broken system, as we said earlier on, that because this is a discretionary issue, who decides who's investigated? The moment as long as the system is discretionary in that way, what triggers the investigation? What triggers the request for a disclosure? This is where we might end up having issues, but otherwise it's following trends in other jurisdictions, and I think it's progressive.
Kuziva, I think here you are now representing ZAC at the moment. So a couple of questions there. Edmund says, who's responsible? Who triggers the mechanism to at least get corruption investigated? That's number one. And secondly, I think, which was also relevant in terms of the discussion, is you are anti-corruption. But as the doctor said, some of this is just pure theft. It isn't anti-corruption, but maybe it lands up on Zach's desk, but it's just theft and it should be handled by the relevant police force and so forth, not Zach. Maybe you could just comment on those two issues.
Thank you. Precisely what Edmund has said, who triggers? I think if you remember a little while back, the Justice emphasized that when we fight corruption, it is not about ZAC alone, it is all of us. So it is the public, it is Edmund himself who triggers this motion to go forward. So it is all of us. It is those who are looking at me now. They are the ones who trigger this. We have received the report of the Auditor General, and there are triggers in there. But again, as the Justice has said, we cannot then rush around and say on page so-and-so has been named, page so-and-so, and yeah, we are arresting all of you. We take cases by them.
I know that you have another part to answer, but I just need to ask you this question. You know, a lot of people have said we all need to be involved in this. It's everybody, every Zimbabwean needs to be involved. Yeah. It kind of sounds as if it's something to say, but what actually can be done to make people get involved? Because it's a reality of life. People are paying.
And also when we bear in mind what Muchaneta mentioned, that right now anybody who feels like they have information doesn't feel safe to come forward with it. So what are the mechanisms that are being put in place to ensure that should a whistleblower have information, they are protected?
The Minister alluded to that there's a wide range of reforms that are coming in that regard, where whistleblowers are going to be protected, where I would believe safe houses are going to be declared, so that those who are able to come forward and give that information, they feel safe that when they give that information, they are going to be protected. They're not going to be followed after by those who they are accusing.
How do you make you, me, everybody out there in Zimbabwe, how do you make us your soldiers, your foot soldiers against corruption? I think I'd like to ask you that, and maybe we can also move it across, because this is an important question, because everyone talks about all of us. Mm-hmm. How do you get all of us to do this when we're all paying bribes, everyone's looking for some money to make here and there? This is a fact of life. What is Zach going to try and do to make ordinary Zimbabweans be with you in the fight against corruption?
Zach, at the moment, it has already started to enlist the support of the general public through education, making people aware what the ills of corruption are, making people aware that there is an opportunity for them to report corruption, making people aware that if they do report corruption, they've got certain protection that they will receive. So those instruments are very, very, very important. Public education is very important, that people are aware that they can come forth. And Edmund referred to thresholds. Yes, I think there are processes going on right now where those thresholds are being signed into MOUs with the other relevant investigative organs, so that we are not running after somebody who has changed to buy medicine.
If I may, some of the corruption or some of that's happening in society is what it's called minor, but it affects people, ordinary people. Yeah. It's their $20, their $50 they're paying, and I think Muchaneta, maybe you can answer this. The question is that when I'm paying that petrol attendant to get a full tank, or when I'm paying somebody to get my passport, I'm not going to go rushing to Zach to report this. I have no mechanism as an ordinary citizen. Maybe we can comment on this, and maybe, Minister, you can come to that.
Precisely, Indy. And once again, we need to go back to the root of the problem. What you're talking about is survival corruption. I need to survive because the situation has forced me to that level. We have to realize that the social contract between the government and the citizens has been eroded. How do we get that back? So as long as the social contract is not there, as long as the citizens do not have faith in the system, we'll continue having petty corruption. Also, I know fighting corruption is more than throwing people in jail, but it will be nice to send a deterrent message out there, arrest one person who's of politically exposed person, for example, to send a deterrent message, because at the moment it is more lucrative to engage in corrupt activities than otherwise. So we need to go back to the root of the cause and not deal with survival corruption, so to say.
Minister, I like that, survival corruption, because she's 100% correct, isn't it? This is just, if you want a passport, you have to pay to get one. If you want petrol, you need to pay to get it.
And these are things that you need, so you're going to pay to get them.
You're going to pay. Minister, what do ordinary citizens do? What can they do? Because I think they feel a bit powerless.
Thank you very much. I will respond to that, but I want to thank Edmund for the progressive contribution that he gave to say that the law on unexplained wealth is a very good law, but who is going to determine? And he also indicated issues to say what are the thresholds, and I agree with him that the first point is we are all in agreement that we need a law to deal with people that overnight wake up with wealth that is not explained. But we need a cutoff so that we do not unnecessarily punish our citizens. And that's exactly what we will be working on, and even when the bill goes to Parliament, to say what level of wealth are we looking at. And we also have to subject this application before a judge, and the law enforcer will have to justify why such an order has to be issued, so that this person can be given that order to say, explain yourself. So I agree with you that in order not to make it a bad law, we need to look into that. And who decides that investigations must be carried out, like he said, it's our responsibility. Where you see somebody suddenly he earns about $200, but his lifestyle is not consummate with that, it's our duty, everyone's duty, to report. And the law enforcer they have to do their work before they approach a judge for an order to enforce that.
So report to who?
To law enforcement agents, the police, and the PG can also apply for make an expert application before a judge to say that we need an unexplained order against Ziyambi, because as we know him, this are his earnings, this is what he has been doing. If you are a cross-border, people know that this person is hustling, he has been doing this. People know all that. But there are certain people that overnight, and you just cannot tell what they are doing. But they are filthy rich.
Minister, the issue here, I think, is one of, say, people that want to get one over on you, or they want to report their neighbors because maybe they're jealous, or they just don't like you. And so you don't want the situation where the police force is inundated with all these false reports, and innocent citizens may be caught up in the net. Is there not a simpler way of making sure that these corrupt people are caught?
Exactly. There will be a checklist. You see, if you report, it doesn't mean that the moment you report, the police will act. They also need to satisfy that themselves that there is a case that is worth going before a judge to make an expert application. So if you, the safeguard is the law enforcers are not allowed to approach you and say, explain. They have to go to a court and justify why that has to happen. And the individual will be given an opportunity to respond. So I think it's a good law that is progressive and that does not have a criminal sanction, but will deter people from having engaging in activities that are unexplained.
Yeah. And of course the issue about ordinary people, these so what you call them, survival bribes.
Yes, that's where I'm coming at now. I think the thrust that we need to look at as a country, we should not focus on these petty crimes that somebody bribed a petrol attendant. We need to look at the root cause of the shortage. The moment the shortages are no longer there, there's no need for you to pay $5. That's the reason why I alluded to the fact that we have had a breakdown of our industrial structure. We have had institutional breakdown, largely also because of mismanagement, but the major effect has been sanctions. Any businessman in Zimbabwe will tell you that to do a transaction, to order goods to sell here, it's a hassle. You are subjected to so many questions regarding is your company under the US or EU sanctions, and I myself, on several occasions, I've had money returned after 6 months. Not immediately, after 6 or 8 months, because they will reject and say we can't accept the money, we have to reject it because of US compliance laws. So if you look at all those situations, if they lead to breakdown in industrial development, and once you have shortages, the petty corruption sprouts.
Okay, Minister, we are going to move to other comments, but just one idea. You say that we need to get rid of some of these shortages, and then unfortunately the shortages are not going away. So that means that petty corruption will continue, and it does affect ordinary Zimbabweans. This is happening every day, even down to having to buy cash on the streets for 30% margins. Maybe we can also respond, but let's just get some comments from the other panelists. That's okay, Minister. Edmund?
Yeah, this will sound quite unorthodox, but I don't think that the petty corruption, with reference at least to the fuel, is necessarily a problem. What that reflects is value. We've subsidized fuel, and you're trying to sell fuel at a sub-economic price. So what happens is naturally you trigger shortages because the government doesn't have enough money to subsidize that fuel. And the moment you create shortages, the fuel suddenly increases in value. So the guy at the fuel station will say, hold on a minute, this is a bit more valuable than $6, pay more. So it's not a serious issue. What we really need is to solve the problem. Let's stop the subsidies. Let's accept the fact that we cannot subsidize fuel because we're one of the poorest countries in the world.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. We unfortunately, I always say on The Chase, we can talk here all night because this is such a fascinating topic, but I want to move to the Transparency International Zimbabwe report. You recently published a survey on the Global Corruption Barometer 10th edition, which implied that 60% of Zimbabweans think corruption has increased in the last 12 months. 71% think that government is doing a bad job tackling corruption. 25% of public service users paid a bribe in the last 12 months. And 45% think that ordinary citizens can make a difference in the fight against corruption. So let's just step back a bit. This survey or this report that you did, can you just clarify how many Zimbabweans, for example, were in the sample survey? That's number one. And also, maybe you could just take us to the salient, vital points of the report for us.
Thank you, Andy. Unfortunately, I did not bring the figures with me today, but it's a study that was conducted by Transparency International in Berlin in partnership with in partnership with Afrobarometer, yes. So it basically looked at the levels of corruption within African countries, and Zimbabwe was one of those countries. And like you rightfully said, people do not have faith in the system at the moment, despite the several anti-policy and institutional reforms that were created since November 2017. What that says, Andy, is, I'll speak to the root cause. The institutions have broken down. We have strong institutions, but are the people who are manning those institutions independent to perform their duties in an effective manner? Like what Edmund said, there is a problem, and it's politically embedded. And it's one that we have to deal with as a nation if we're going to tackle corruption. Without people having faith in the system, corruption is going to spiral out of control, like what the figures are saying at the moment.
I think what was fascinating, sorry, Minister, if you...
I think I need to respond on the basis of those figures. I think what we have in Zimbabwe are a lot of people who are now accustomed to gossip and not to facts. I'm one of those. I read an article where I was told I'm an owner of state-of-the-art Range Rovers, and it's unbelievable the wealth that I was attributed to have, yet I didn't have any of that. And this is one report that I would say is based on totally falsehoods. The last 12 months, for anyone to claim that corruption has increased, I would respectfully say that is false.
Edmund, you heard that. It's false. Oh, well, here we go. Yes, please.
Okay, there's one way to solve it. Can the Ministry of Justice conduct its own survey and we come back again?
I think, actually, you know, where the issue is, and you raised an interesting question earlier on when we started. You said, what is the definition of corruption? If we look at corruption in a strictly legal sense, then Zimbabwe will get away with a lot, because those who are guilty are very good at crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And I'll give you two examples. There was a point just a few months ago where the authorities were taking US dollars from exporters. Everyone understood that the value of a US dollar was perhaps at 4 to 5. But the government took this money using administrative fiat, the force of law, and said this is one-to-one. It's corruption, morally, economically. We have a case in Matabeleland South, which has been blanketed with exclusive prospecting orders. I phoned the director after getting some complaints. He was saying, can you help us investigate this? And I phoned him. I said, okay, we have these exclusive prospecting orders. And the effect of an exclusive prospecting order is that if you're trying to peg a mine in Mat South, and there's an exclusive prospecting order covering that land, you can't peg it. Now, I asked him, I said, okay, who's getting these orders and why? Which company is this? Do they actually have capacity? How long will they last? He says it's classified. It's been signed by the president. He has not committed a crime. When the Reserve Bank governor took that money from those individuals at 1:1, he has not committed a crime. But it's moral and economic corruption. Now, we can satisfy the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law is not being satisfied in Zimbabwe. And I think we do have a serious crisis in this country. It's encouraging that the government is saying all the right things. But I think until we can sit down and actually say, okay, we've got a political problem here. And I'm giving the example of that exclusive prospecting order. Someone wants to peg a mine in Mat South. Now you have to go to a guy with a briefcase business and say, excuse me, I want to open a mine, because he's pegged perhaps 5,000 hectares. And he actually isn't interested in prospecting for gold or any other mineral. He simply knows, because he has proximity to power, he can get the T's crossed and the I's dotted.
Edmund, you made a good point, because one of the issues I think that's come up in various debates or discussions is that what is the transparency when it comes to issuing these mineral claims? Because obviously we've got loads of mineral claims. All of a sudden we have mining companies coming in and getting huge claims. Should that be transparent? Should we know exactly why they're getting it? What is the background for them?
In an ideal world, tenders should be online. Tenders should be online. When someone files their papers, it should be encrypted and sent to everyone else who's bid. And then the decryption code should be sent to everyone else when the tenders are open. there's no reason why it should not be on the internet. We're living in a digital age. If the local authority is buying chemicals, let the entire country know. Let everyone know. If somebody can do it cheaper, then we know. So definitely I agree, even in terms of mining claims and property, let's have more data. Let's put the information into computers, onto websites and so on. So yes, I agree with you. We definitely require more transparency. In terms of the EPOs, I think the threshold for someone getting an exclusive prospecting order should be very high. If you do get an exclusive prospecting order, every quarter you should be sending a submission to the Ministry of Mines. Okay, what have you done? What have you found? How long do you need this prospecting, exclusive prospecting order to exist? Because to just give someone an exclusive prospecting order and then they can sit in it and nobody else can actually peg in a mine in that area, it's morally offensive. It's corruption, but it crosses the T's, it dots the I. Nobody will go to jail. You can't prove anything.
Minister, is Zimbabwe transparent when it comes to giving away our mineral rights to investors? Are we transparent? Do we know what's happening? Do we know that they can actually bring that mineral to market?
I think it raises a very good point. We have a mines and minerals bill that we are looking at. What we have discovered is, in this country, people are very good at using names. And if somebody uses my name and Edmund is talking to that person, it becomes political. You walk into a mining office, they'll tell you this is very sensitive. Yet it's that particular person that is doing that. It happened in Bindura, where we ended up having to suspend everyone in that office because of what they've been doing. And the best way of fighting corruption, which I agree with him now, is we have to use ICT. And we remove this human interface as much as we can.
So you're advocating more transparency from government when it comes to things like, for example, tenders, when it comes to mineral licenses.
Precisely.
More transparency between government and the citizens.
Yes, yes. That's exactly what we are advocating. We are advocating more transparency, particularly when we are doing what he was alluding to. That is the way which we are, that's the thinking of government, that we should do it more that way. But we are also waiting for the new bill that admittedly has taken long, and we believe we need to revolutionize the way that we've been dealing with the mining sector. And I agree with him that a lot of people, but where he is missing it is a lot of our citizens, they are very good at name dropping. They will tell you, I'm from the president.
I think the difficulty is that the EPO is actually signed by the president.
Okay, I think we let the specifics there. Please,
the problem that he's doing is becoming specific. You see, what happens is I can sign something on the basis of paperwork that has been done correctly.
Fair enough.
Not knowing the background of what was happening. But where I agree with him is where we publish it and we use ICT and everybody knows that this is what is happening. Look at what the courts are now doing. The courts, we progressively moving towards using ICT so that everyone knows what is happening. So that way I agree with you. But even if you were a minister, there are certain documents that will be prepared legally, you can't challenge it. And what you have to do is to append your signature. Because everything is, you tick all the boxes. Has this been done? Yes. Has this been done? Yes. So I agree on that point, but I believe that we are on the right track, even though I...
Okay, while you're still on the mining, I would like to pose a question to the Minister. In the national budget, it was mentioned that Zimbabwe is the intention of joining the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, which will curb some of the challenges that Edmund has alluded to. How far have we gone? Or are we also now saying the right things, but slow in terms of implementation?
That's the reason why I alluded to the fact that in the budget, like you are saying, it was mentioned. But what has slowed down the mining reform is we have several issues that we've believed that need to be attended to within the Mines and Minerals Bill. So that has been attended to, and hopefully very soon it will come to Parliament so that we get the legal backing to do whatever we want to do.
Because some of the issues that we're dealing with are issues to do with beneficial ownership. Who owns what way? So I think those are some of the issues that we need to look at as a nation.
All right, Muchaneta and Dr. Munda, let me bring you in now. Let's say, for example, Zimbabwe overnight becomes the model for transparency. Does that fix the problem, or is it just one of the things that needs to be fixed?
Well, transparency in the sense, in the definition or in the practice?
Both.
Let me go step back a bit. In 2008, the Minister of Finance, Minister Chinamasa, read a budget where he called the New Economic Order for Zimbabwe. And he described the Zimbabwe where he said there is indiscipline in the management of public finances. There is failure to adhere to approved budgets. There is significant expenditures incurred arbitrarily outside budget processes. There is failure to follow laid down systems. There is quasi-fiscal expenditures. He went on and on to explain how public funds are dissipated in so many uncontrolled processes that it's almost impossible to figure out who is spending the money. To me, the first step to actually pulling it back is be able to actually institute systems that make sure the public resources are used for the purposes that were done, and if they are not, it's put out made available. Because you can chase up the guy who collects $20 from the policeman. And the citizens of Zimbabwe are very happy when they were no longer being stopped every 1 kilometer and asked to shaken down for $10. That is very important. But the real problem is that the biggest resources we got, the citizens are paid taxes. They are given the money to the government to actually spend it. It's being spent in so many pockets with so poor controls that although there are promises to do something about it, the gap between the promise and implementation is such that it starts creating the arbitrage. That the rules, the citizen how to play with the rules to make sure that, well, the rule says you must go and change your money in the Reserve Bank, but it's giving me 8.5. The market is giving me 11. Well, I go to the market and buy at 11. So all of us, the rules you've created promote and grow and push the corruption forward. Somewhere along the line, Zimbabwe has to kind of close the gap between the statement and the implementation. Then you remove this space where people can play. Because citizens all over the world, it's not to Zimbabweans only. You created those kind of situation anywhere in the world, even in the United States. People will just take, well, the advantage is there. There's a track I can drive through, I'll drive through there and do whatever the rule. If the law says one thing and they practice something else, citizens will find a way to actually operate, remaining the law, but as you called it, it's not morally, it's not right. It's not the way we want to live, whether you're a Christian or you want to live. But the truth of the matter, you have to close the gap between the intention and the practice. And to me, if I were to say anything out of this discussion, is the fiscal transparency has to start with the way the government resources are used, accounted for, and reported on.
So do you feel that fiscal transparency in Zimbabwe is improving as compared to previous years? And why would it be important that it improved?
I think it is improving in the sense that the Minister of Finance has, for instance, I've listened to the reports that he has given. Clearly, the Minister of Finance has twice explained how the money he collected is spending it, where the money is going on. But there's a tension between the fiscal attempt to manage the fiscal and the monetary expansionism. So when you have one, the fiscal is trying to constrain and the monetary is trying to expand, then that contradiction creates opportunities for the corruption to continue growing. Somewhere along the line, the monetary and the fiscal have to be aligned, have to find a way of aligning themselves so that what the money they collected for the state does and what the money buys for me on the street, there's a convergence of the two of them. Then the opportunity for arbitrage disappears. And therefore, the question of fuel, whether it is maize, whether it is buying bread, there's no need to actually start playing in this gray space. And to me, that, I think, is the challenge we have.
All right. Well, time flies, doesn't it, when you're on the chase? Because this discussion, we got so much to talk about. We even wanted to talk about Transparency International's recommendations, make it compulsory for public officials to declare assets, adopt a national anti-corruption strategy, make it mandatory for all public sector employees to undergo anti-corruption and integrity training. And I'm sure that we'll get you back here on ZTN to actually maybe unpack your report more so that the viewers out there can actually hear all the recommendations Transparency International gave, and let's see whether Minister of Justice, who is here, he takes those on board and hopefully implements some of them, because I think some of them are quite good, if I could say so myself. Right, Candice?
Oh, just a quick look at who's watching from where on social media. We have Mafunga James, who is watching in Harare. Zivanai Sabanda is in Cape Town. Michael Matekedza is watching from the UK. Neria Mashamba is also in the UK. Ngobani Chavangu is in the UK as well. Elizabeth Rawson in Leeds. Lydia Mudila in the United States. Famba Nero is in Massachusetts, also in the United States. Trimo Mafeachia watching from South Africa. Julius Chimombe in Witbank. Melanie Sivanda is in Victoria Falls. And of course, we've got Timothy Gumbi, who is watching from Tete in Mozambique.
Well, thank you so much for watching. And of course, we recognize some of those names because this program is very important. Corruption and, of course, fiscal transparency. Unfortunately, we said we're coming to the end of our program. However, there is one thing that I think came out of the report, whether you agree with the report or not. The minister said, I don't know what your exact words were, complete rubbish, I think it was. But even if you don't agree with the report, the fact is, and I'd like you all to start from you and we can go around. The fact is that there is a perception, and sometimes perception can be the truth, whether it's right or not. So maybe your final comments before we wrap up the show.
Thank you. Yes, perceptions are very difficult to deal with, and you cannot put your pulse on perceptions that if I do this, then the perceptions would go away. But I would be interested in reading further the Transparency International report, and my good sister here challenged that we should do our own report. But then we would want to know what their sample was, because we would like to compare apples with apples and see whether we get the same facts, and they should justify their sample and why they dealt with that sample and so on and so forth. I hope that in this fight that we've started, we are able to reduce those negative perceptions and that we fight it together, as had been alluded before, so that we take this country forward. It is a great country, but it is things like this that are really pushing us down and would like to lift up by fighting corruption.
Thank you.
Thank you. Perceptions. I'll go back to the Auditor General's report. Transformers were paid for. 9 years later, they were not delivered. Are we wrong to think that nothing is being done? Are we wrong to think that corruption has gone wild, like a wildfire in Zimbabwe? I don't think so.
Thank you. I think we're going to have a whole new program on fiscal transparency, because it looks like this conversation is just on corruption, but that's another discussion for another day. Minister, any final thoughts?
Thank you very much. A lot is being done to fight corruption. A lot of changes have happened within parastatals, in government, and the willpower to ensure that we fight corruption is there. We have a very huge appetite to ensure that we eradicate corruption. Thank you.
I would say the government, if you want to find perception, the government should have a communication strategy that puts out the facts, puts the information out so the citizens know, the media can analyze it, and not worry about saying what the perception is. Let the people make their perceptions based on the facts that you put on the table, with a coherent communication strategy that relies on putting the evidence on the table so people can make up their mind.
Thank you. Edmund?
Transparency and accountability, and it starts from the top. In 2008, the Minister of Finance said he had struck a deal with Afrexim Bank, which would guarantee our RTGS dollars would be at par with the United States dollars. That was not true. This is at the highest level. That was not transparent. It was not true. It was corrupt, possibly criminal. Has he been held to account? No. Will he be held to account? No. The deals being signed with Afrexim Bank, transparency, we don't have the terms. We don't know what we're signing up to. Why? What do we have to hide? So it has to come from the top. If the finance minister can lie and get away with it, why not an accounting officer?
Thank you.
Thank you, Edmund. Look, it is clear that corruption obviously is a scourge to the nation and to Zimbabwe, and that it's all of our duty to hold together and to actually make sure that we get rid of it. We need to work with the authorities, we need to work with ZAC if need be, and also the ministry and ordinary citizens to get rid of that. Anyway, we'd like to thank our partners, United States Embassy here in Harare, Zimbabwe, and of course our broadcast partners, Capi Talk, Nyami Nyami FM, Diamond FM, and Voice of America, going out to 80 channels around the world. We really appreciate you watching and listening to us here on The Chase.
Absolutely. We are very grateful to have you joining us every week and taking part in the discussions. We hope that it has been a fruitful discussion and it has left you with a lot to think about of how you can get involved in the fight against corruption. However, this is where we call it
it's unfortunate, it is. And you can see that at least we've started the debate with the help of the United States Embassy here in Harare. The debate has started, and I think we're going to continue having these sort of debates about corruption and what we can do about it. Please visit our Facebook page, Zimpapers TV Network, and of course our website, ztn.co.zw. We've got lots of programming on there. What do we have? Heartbeat, On the Couch.
We have so much to offer.
So much to offer. So
and
please.
Something for everybody. If you're into sports, if you're into entertainment, there's something for everyone to look forward to.
100%. And of course, I'm with you every morning at 10 a.m. on The Mint, which is ZTN's premier business show. In fact, Zimbabwe's premier business show. Why don't I say that? But anyway, thank you. Thank you to our panelists. We've enjoyed having you here. And thank you to the American Embassy here in Harare, Zimbabwe. And of course, all we can say from me and Candice is good night. And make sure you take care of each other.
Good night.